Israeli police stormed Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa mosque, firing rubber bullets and stun grenades at Palestinians that celebrated the ceasefire between Gaza and Israel. Cuban health authorities report more than 1 million people vaccinated against COVID-19, with at least 2 doses of vaccine candidates Soberana 2 and Abdala. In Colombia, the strike committee called for a new day of national mobilization for May 26 and 28. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. Friday, thousands of Palestinians gathered at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound celebrating the ceasefire between Gaza and Israel after 11 days of deadly fighting. Celebrations were also heard in Gaza minutes after the truce came into effect, as cars honked their horns and guns were fired in the air, while in the occupied West Bank, joyful crowds also took to the streets. Egypt, which mediated the agreement, said it would send 2 delegations to monitor the ceasefire. The truce came after international diplomatic efforts and growing pressure to bring an end to the most intense Israeli attacks over Palestine since the 2014 war in Gaza. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, during the latest fighting, at least 66 Palestinian children were killed and nearly 200 people were injured and tens of thousands displaced. Hours later, Israeli police stormed Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque, firing rubber bullets and stun grenades at Palestinians. According to health authorities, 20 Palestinians were wounded. Israeli police fired rubber bullets and stun grenades. Also, in the flashpoint neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in occupied East Jerusalem, Palestinians said they have been placed under a siege by Israeli forces. Israeli police have been preventing non-residents from entering the neighborhood, which has been closed off. Palestinian residents have limited their movements and are mostly staying at home, because if they leave the neighborhood, Israeli authorities sometimes will not allow them to return. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's security cabinet approved on Thursday a ceasefire to halt the 11-day military operation in the occupied Gaza Strip. The decision followed international pressure to halt the offensive. Israel and Hamas, the Palestinian resistance movement, entered a mutual ceasefire at 2 a.m. on Friday. Netanyahu's office said in a statement that Israel's security cabinet had agreed to accept an Egyptian proposal for a mutual ceasefire without any preconditions. Meanwhile, far-right Israeli lawmakers, including some of Netanyahu's closest political allies, warned him against a ceasefire agreement with Hamas resistance. At least 230 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip over the past 11 days, according to Gaza health officials. Airstrikes rocked the Gaza Strip late on Thursday, just before Israel and Hamas announced a ceasefire, ending a devastating 11-day Israeli attack that claimed hundreds of lives. A surveillance camera in Netiv Hazara in Israel, close to the border with the occupied Palestinian territory, recorded several bright explosions lighting up the night sky. The Israeli army did not immediately specify what was being targeted in the area, from where it claimed that rockets were fired by the Palestinian resistance movement. On Friday, United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres urged to respect the Israeli-Palestinian ceasefire after days of deadly attacks. The Secretary-General stated that Israeli and Palestinian leaders have a responsibility beyond the restoration of calm to start a serious dialogue to address a definitive peace for the region. The executive also emphasized that the Gaza Strip is a fundamental part of the future Palestinian state, and no efforts should be spared to achieve true national reconciliation. Guterres recalled that the unconscionable death, suffering, and destruction of the past 10 days only pushed the prospect of sustained peace further into the future, and that is why an immediate ceasefire and a revitalized Middle East peace process are the only route to a just and lasting solution. On Friday, China welcomed the ceasefire in Gaza following 11 days of escalating tension sparked by Israel. The Asian country also announced that the urgent delivery of humanitarian aid to Palestine to support its people in dealing with the crisis worsened by Israel's aggression.
China will provide $1 million of emergency humanitarian assistance to Palestine in cash, provide humanitarian material support to the best of its ability in light of Palestine's needs, and take an active part in the reconstruction of Gaza. We are also to provide $1 million in assistance to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, and 200,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccine to the Palestinian people to offer them practical help. In order to prevent the tragedy of the Palestine-Israel conflict from happening again, the international community should promote the resumption of peace talks between the two sides to achieve a comprehensive, just and sustainable solution to the Palestinian issue on the basis of the two-state solution. China will push the UN Security Council to comprehensively review the Palestinian issue and reconfirm the two-state solution.
Following the announcement of a ceasefire, Egypt's representative and the United Nations announced to member states that it will fund efforts to rebuild Palestinian territory damaged in the fighting.
We have announced that we allocated $500 million in the context of an Egyptian initiative for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. And we also announced that the specialist Egyptian companies will be involved in the reconstruction process. Mr. President, by way of conclusion, Egypt confirms on the basis of its historic responsibilities with regard to the Palestinian question that we pursue all efforts and we provide our full capacities and efforts to ensure that the Palestinian people can enjoy security, peace and stability in within a Palestinian state on the line of the 4th of July 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you very much.
The Palestinian Foreign Minister sharply rejected on Thursday in the United Nations General Assembly the statement that Israel is defending itself through its offensive on the Gaza Strip and also condemned Israeli atrocities and crimes.
Re-energize the interest among everybody in order really to see things really moving ahead. We do believe that the meeting of the General Assembly has really sent very strong message to the Security Council that you have to take up your responsibility. You have to find, you have to decide among yourselves, and we have really to deal with this issue very seriously. Otherwise, if you fail, then there is another option, the General Assembly. And I do believe that the messages were very clear and were received very well among the members of the Security Council and beyond. The third message that we heard united, strong voice from the General Assembly by so many countries. Message that was sent to the Palestinians that you are not alone, that you are, that many countries are with you, supportive, you feel what you feel, and really working very hard to end your suffering, very, very importantly. But then another message is also to Israel, that Israel cannot enjoy impunity forever, that at least there is an opinion being really developed among so many countries in the General Assembly and outside of the General Assembly that says that Israeli impunity has to stop, and Israel has to be accountable for its own crimes that's being really committed against the Palestinian people.
We'll go now to a short break. Follow us on Twitter at TeleSUR English and Gladys TeleSUR. Welcome back from the South. In Cuba, health authorities reported that more than 1 million people have been vaccinated against COVID-19, with at least 2 doses of the nation's vaccine candidates Soberana 2 and Abdala. The director of the Science and Technology of the Ministry of Public Health, Dr. Ileana Morales, said that the current vaccination is part of the studies to assess the efficacy of these candidates. Morales also said that more than 330,000 health workers, including staff from the biopharmaceutical industry and more than 172,000 citizens, received the doses. Furthermore, the vaccine candidates were also administered to more than 612,000 people living in high-risk municipalities in Havana. Argentina's President Alberto Fernández announced a 9-day lockdown for high-risk areas as the country sees a surge in coronavirus cases. In the last 24 hours, the country registered nearly 36,000 COVID-19 cases and more than 400 fatalities.
We are going to restrict circulation in all areas of the country that are at high risk or in epidemiological alarm. This measure will be enforced from this Saturday, May 22nd at midnight until Sunday, May 30th. People will only be allowed to circulate in the surroundings of their homes between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. of each day, and exceptionally, especially authorized persons will be allowed to circulate. I want to be very clear and precise. This is a decision that lasts 9 days. I'm very conscious and fully aware that these restrictions cause difficulties. In this reality, there is no choice but to choose the preservation of life. I am not going to accept the normalization of this number of infections or deaths.
Brazil has detected its first cases of the COVID-19 variant first found in India in crew members who arrived aboard an Asian cargo ship, as announced by officials in Maranhão state.
In all 6 samples, people tested positive for the Indian variant V.1.617.2, which has variant qualified as a variant of attention. What care are we going to take with regard to the people who had contact with these 3 patients? Because 3 left the ship, we will continue with the tracking. Our determination is that we will do the entire tracking of everyone, so it is about 100 people. Not everyone has contact with them, but it's necessary to do it.
On Thursday, Regional Director for Africa at the World Health Organization, Dr. Matshidiso Moeti, warned that the time is running out for African countries to close the gap on vaccines inequality, noting that fewer than 2% of people on the continent have received a COVID-19 vaccine jab, compared with 80% in high-income nations.
So when we look at access to the vaccines, we see great inequalities across countries. Seychelles is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world, with 67% of the population having received at least 1 dose. In Morocco, they've reached 21.9%, and in Mauritius, 17%. Whereas in 14 African countries, less than 1% of the population has received a single dose, and in 4 countries, vaccination hasn't started at all. COVID-19 vaccine shipments to African countries have slowed down to a trickle this month, because of the reliance on India as one of the key manufacturers globally and the devastating surge of cases that that country is dealing with. The continent was expecting 66 million doses through COVAX from February to May, but instead has so far received only 18.2 million.
And now we move on to other topics. This Friday, the Supreme Eurasian Economic Council met on a video conference to analyze the functioning of the Eurasian Economic Union and the main strategic directions for the strengthening the integration process. Presidents of Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and the acting Prime Minister of Armenia participated in the meeting, as well as the heads of state of Uzbekistan and Cuba as observer states of the Eurasian Economic Union. The meeting will approve the main guidelines of the macroeconomic policies of the member countries for the period of 2021 to 2022, and will evaluate the progress of the efforts to eliminate the obstacles found in the bloc's domestic market during 2020. Decisions will also be made to boost the efficiency of the single market for services, increasing the level of essential medicines productions and unifying legislation in the agricultural sector. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel highlighted the strong ties of friendship and cooperation that unite the Caribbean nation with the member countries of the Eurasian Economic Union.
We hereby express our willingness to establish an effective cooperation with the member states of the Eurasian Economic Union based on the exchange of experiences between the experts of our countries, medical cooperation, and collaboration with our vaccine candidates. We also declare ourselves ready to begin the process of inclusion in the common market for medicines, devices, and medical technology, whose creation is established by the Treaty of the Eurasian Economic Union.
Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney and his French counterpart Jean-Yves Le Drian criticized Britain for attempting to unravel elements of the Brexit divorce deal with the European Union. The post-Brexit protocol for Northern Ireland has been a source of controversy ever since they came into effect at the start of 2021, and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government has made unilateral moves to alter it.
The United Kingdom have made commitments, and they need to follow through on those commitments, and we will help them to do that in a way that is politically, I hope, saleable for the British government. But let's not entertain the idea of unilaterally breaking your word effectively.
It will occur to you that British dignity and honor will make them renounce something that has just been ratified. That would be staggering.
And Azerbaijan is ready for peace talks with Armenia, President Ilham Aliyev said on Thursday, 6 months after the Caucasus neighbors fought a war over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region.
I several times said that we are ready to start working on peace agreement with Armenia. In order to put an end to a war, in order to minimize or eliminate any risk of potential military standoff, we need to have a peace agreement, we need to have a border delimitation with Armenia. All that needs joint efforts. We cannot do it unilaterally.
The Labor Department said on Thursday that fewer Americans sought unemployment benefits last week, the latest encouraging sign for the rebound in the U.S. economy, just as Republican-led states are moving to cut off a federal benefit for the jobless. 22 states plan to begin blocking a $300 a week federal payment for the unemployed starting in June. Florida is considering ending the supplemental payment, and Nebraska, said it will maintain the payments while it evaluates the pandemic-related jobless benefits. Those cutoffs coincide with a steady decline in the number of Americans seeking unemployment aid, which fell last week to 444,000, a new pandemic low. More news in a minute. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. This Friday, representatives of the National Strike Committee and the Colombian government met once again to find a solution to the crisis in which the country has been involved for the past 24 days. After the meeting, both parties stated that they are progressing in an agreement that warrants peaceful mobilizations and reaffirmed that there is a clear will to move forward and reach consensus. Despite the progresses made, new mobilizations were announced in the midst of the national strike. According to Francisco Malta, member of the strike committee, protests will continue next week on May 26th and 28th. Representatives from the Teachers Union, the Central Union of Workers, and other social organizations were present in the dialogues, as well as representatives from the Colombian government, such as the High Commissioner for Peace, Miguel Ceballos. President Ivan Duque's handling of the national strike and social mobilizations in Colombia is increasingly exposed to the world. 51 deaths, thousands wounded, and more than 25 cases of sexual violence committed by members of law enforcement are not just numbers. However, and despite the reactions that forced the recently appointed Foreign Minister Martha Lucía Ramírez to appear before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in Washington, police brutality does not stop, and several communities under the shadow of night and the information blackout are once again besieged by police and para-police groups.
Once again, the station Portal de las Americas has been the epicenter of peaceful demonstrations in the capital city of Bogota. There, the anti-riot squad repressed demonstrators. Not even the presence of Government Secretary Luis Ernesto Gomez could prevent the anti-riot squad from attacking demonstrators, neighbors, and even the health staff protected by national and international laws. In the northeast of Colombia, in the city of Bucaramanga, capital of the Department of Santander, security forces kidnapped a person, an action that was confirmed hours later when the Metropolitan Police took over the case, an action devoid of any legality. Cali, one of the cities hardest hit by police and parapolice abuses, once again lived through another night of violence in which several people were reported injured, especially in the community of Siloé, and investigations are ongoing to clarify the situation in a commercial center in Calypso.
On Friday, the United Nations mission in Colombia stated that the efforts to facilitate a dialogue between the government and the National Strike Committee to find a solution to the crisis in the country continue. According to the multilateral organization, an equal and fair dialogue is a key to advancing the negotiations. It stressed that respect for human rights and channels for dialogue should be guidelines for the management of the current situation. Meanwhile, protests continue against the policies of the government of Iván Duque and will take various forms, from the traditional demonstrations to artistic expressions showing their peaceful nature. Protesters will continue to denounce the end of violence, the implementation of the peace agreement, dismantling of the mobile anti-riot squad, resignation of several government officials, a police reform, among other demands. In Colombia, the protests are getting an international scope. On Thursday, important shipping companies reported the closure of shipments in the port of Buenaventura on the Pacific coast of the country. This decision represents a significant downturn for the country's international trade. Colombia's international trade agents were notified by their subsidiaries in China that shipping lines Maersk, COSCO, Evergreen, Hamburg Sud, and MSC, some of the most important in the world, closed bookings for the port of Buenaventura, the most important port in Colombia, due to the unstable atmosphere sparked by the national strike. And the Cuban Economy Minister Alejandro Gil stressed on Thursday that U.S. President Joe Biden has not moved policy on Cuba at all since he arrived at the White House, and that the island's economy has continued to suffer the limitations, restrictions, and pressures of U.S. sanctions. The minister also noted that despite the U.S. blockade, it has been possible to care for the population during the pandemic.
We already have experience in how to calculate the damage of the blockade. And last year, the calculation showed that the impact of the country's economy is around $5.5 billion. And if we take the last years, we are talking about $17 billion. We can refer that the country has had to invest only for all the issues that have to do with the PCR COVID-19 test, more than $300 million. We are talking about more than 23,000 PCR daily.
On Thursday, former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva confirmed for the first time that he intends to be a candidate in the 2022 presidential elections. Lula da Silva made this announcement after 19 months in a prison and a long legal battle. Meanwhile, in Brazil, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused more than 400,000 deaths, and the value of local currency, real, has fallen by 40% in 2020. The leader of the Workers' Party said during his interview that he fully intends to get Brazil out of the crisis, worsened by the pandemic and the unpopular policies of Jair Bolsonaro. Lula also mentioned that during his presidency, he developed strong ties with Europe, South America, China, and Russia. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.